Ladies and gentlemen and guests, welcome to the 2023 NRFA National Road Freighters Association Conference. Pleased to see so many people here and some new faces for us all to meet. My name's Mike Williams. I co-host the On the Road podcast with my good mate Yogi Kendall over there, and we're supporting the thing here today along with all these other businesses that you see here, and we'll be able to answer questions for you all later. We've got a little bit of an agenda to get through today. We're going to be hearing from Senator Carol Brown, who has sent a video message for everyone to have a bit of a listen to because she couldn't be here personally. I don't see Glenn Sterle anywhere. Is he out there anywhere at the moment? He's supposed to be coming today. Obviously, the Honourable Sam Farraway is here, and Mr John Graham is also here. So we've got a few people. We're going to have a bit of an open mic session later on in the day. What I'd like to do now is let you know that we had our annual general meeting yesterday, and Mr Rod Hannifey was re-elected as the President of the National Road Freighters Association for another year. Congratulations, Rod. And I'd call on Rod now to come and make the opening address.
Morning and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming along. We've got a good turnout today. We've still got some people tied up outside. They were doing some media out there, and Mr Faraday will be along. He has a big announcement. I was listening to what he was saying out there, some of the things we've all been waiting for. I was asked by the reporter what we hope to achieve, and I said a lot of our people are very cynical and very frustrated. We've been asking for certain things for 20 years, and I've been involved in all that time. You can't fix anything overnight. But if you don't come to something like this, how do you even have a start point? And how do you then move from this into getting something done? Sitting in a truck stop and talking about it, yep, might get rid of that frustration, but it doesn't solve the problem. And if you don't take part, if you don't step up and at least make the effort, then nothing will change. So I thank you all for attending. We've got a very big agenda on for the day, and we've had to squeeze people in here and there. We've got a couple of things we might have to add in later on. The demonstration went very well, and again, the one thing that I managed to purely fluke was they were actually picking it up behind me while I was doing a bit on the television, saying that it's not always our fault. I spoke with one of the NHVR representatives earlier, and I said, how do we deal with the media when that's how we're portrayed? Because that's what the public hear, that's what the public tell the police, that's what they act on. And to change that is very hard. But we can start, we can make an effort, and I hope that we'll come out of today with an agenda for things, and with the announcement that we're hearing from Mr Faraday. They're listening, that's one state. We've got a long way to go. People want the NHVR to do more and solve all our problems overnight. And I think, and a bloke asked me the other day, are we better off with the NHVR? We are, we must be. Before we had 7 sets of rules. Now we have 2. I know they're working on having 1. We'd all love to have 1 right across Australia. It's a lovely dream. And Sal wants it just as much as we do. But getting it is hard. And if someone doesn't make the effort and someone doesn't put in the time and effort, then nothing will change. So I thank you for being here. I hope you enjoy the conference and get something out of it. And I look forward to doing my best to help you achieve those things. Thank you.
I think Senator Brown is a great friend of the industry at the moment. I think we'd do well to pay attention to what she's been saying. My good friend Glenn Sterle has turned up here, and I'm going to put him in. I'm just going to drop him in it and ask him to talk for a few minutes about the Rest Area Steering Committee that he's now the chair of, and that we have a couple of guys representing, because the other politicians are still busy with their commitments. So I'm sure Glenn would be happy to talk for 5 minutes, only 5, right? And answer maybe a few questions, certainly anything that Carol's raised. I'm certainly sure that you're okay with. Senator Glenn Sterle, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Welcome. G'day, everyone. Great to see some familiar faces around the room. My apologies. I've just come in with Ruth from Carol's Chief of Staff coming from Canberra. Good to see you all. And earlier this week I'd come down with a bug and I didn't even think I'd get it, so I'm rapt to be here today. Hello Simon, how are you mate? Good to see you too. Sal, you too. Rod, to you and the executive of the NRFA, and of course your members, it's fantastic to be back again. It only feels like 6 months ago we were in Toowoomba. How are you? But anyway, and look, I just want to say this. I always appreciate the opportunity to speak to the grassroots of this fantastic industry, and nothing warms my heart more than when I'm in a room full of truckies, because the best thing about being in a room full of truckies, you don't sugarcoat it, you tell me exactly what you're thinking, and that's what we need to do to get the message out to all levels of government. And I'm very, very happy to say that we finally, there's a saying that the machinery of government moves very slowly. My goodness me, that's never a truer word spoken. But we're now at the stage where finally, then there are a lot of things that we need to do. But one of the election commitments of the Albanese government, as you heard in Toowoomba, was to establish a committee to look at spending $140 million. Personally, I really wish there was another zero on the end, but there's not. I know there's been on rest areas, but I also know that there's been a fair bit of negativity and a fair bit of, here we go again, nothing will get done. Well, look, I've got to tell you, from the outset, the most important thing here is that truckies will be at the table. Now, there's no secret, and you know me, I can't tell fibs because my memory's not that great. I had surrounded myself with people in the event that I hope I had been the minister, and unfortunately I wasn't, and tough, get over it and let's move on, with people that I believe could make a magnificent contribution to working with all levels of government to say we need rest areas, fit for purpose rest areas, sensible stuff. We know that work the Rod's been doing on the green reflector stuff, that sort of stuff. We don't need Taj Mahals. We don't need to have massive $30-40 million proposals that we've seen somehow enter into the trucking media over the years, and we'd only get 3 for $140 million. I don't know where half this rubbish came from, but to actually sit down, and we're going to be doing that. Now, I know that there was, I don't know, I think there was about 40 odd applicants, Ruth, I think, for the positions on the committee, and guys and girls, at the end of the day, the decision was taken by the minister. The minister made it, and the minister I fully support. There are so many more people that could have been on that committee, and a number of you are in the room today. And at the end of the day, I've got to slip up because I was on a plane to Bali when the announcement came over, and I was caught quite short, and I hadn't had emails for 5 days. So I got a bit embarrassed when I got messages from people saying, Glenn, I'm on the committee, and I'm going, my goodness me, that's fantastic. But anyway, so we're going to start work on Monday week, Rod. And congratulations, Rod, you're on it. Craig, you're on it too, mate. Congratulations, mate, that's fantastic. We've got a full agenda for a day and a half. And I've sat down, Ruth and myself and Ben, my advisor from my office, sat down with the department officials on Thursday, my first day back at work this week, to set down where we're going to go. And I just want to share this with you. And I said to the officials, and they're keen as mustard. And look, trust me, they have no idea what rest areas, what truckies do, and why do we need rest areas. But they were fantastic to sit there and say, we really want to learn. And I said, great, because you're going to get truckie speak, so prepare yourselves, put your seatbelts on. But we're going to the truckies will be saying where we need to put these things and what should they look like. It's going to be a lot of work, and it's going to be some hard work, and fair dinkum, our timetable's very tight, Rod. I'm going to tell you, mate, we've got no logbooks in the department or the Senate. It's just roll the sleeves up and just do what we've got to do. And I know that I'm going to have the whip cracking too, because I want to see this thing come to fruition. I want to see us spend this money very, very quickly and get it committed. But the best part is, and I know, and I'm happy to answer any questions, I would love nothing better to have seen just all truck drivers. At the end of the day, there was a process that we had to go through that we weren't expecting to go through. But anyway, for those in the know, you understand why we did. And that's a good thing, that's fine. But I can assure you, out of the 10 participants on this working group, there are 8 truck drivers, and I count myself as one of the truck drivers, not one of the bureaucrats. So 8 to 2 is not a bad start. I think that's fantastic. There's also been a bit of commentary, and look, friends, I have to say this to you, because you know how I operate. Some of the comments around the makeup of the committee I thought was quite poor. And I thought it's, who made it and who didn't make it. There's another 40 people that could have been on that committee. There's another 140 people could have been on that committee. But I can say I've seen all the bios of those that were successful, and our truck drivers are truck drivers. And it's a bit hard to put up a fight against a man or a woman that's got the experience behind the wheel, who has advocated for road safety, advocated for conditions, for rest areas over the years. And just to see some of the social media crap was a little bit disappointing. But at the end of the day, I'm going to stand solid, shoulder to shoulder with the ones that are on the committee. And I can tell you now, I'll still be talking wide, I'll still be talking at every opportunity I can with other truck drivers and other transport operators who want to have their say. Feel free to come direct to me. Now, Mike, you know I could go for an hour with a gobful of marbles underwater, and I'm very happy to have to stand very early to set the pace. But can I just say this? I've just come on this road from Canberra. Ruth and I left Canberra this morning at 7:15. And I said to Ruth, I don't believe, it's been the 80s since I've come through here in my old cab over Scania. The friggin' road's even worse than what it was then. Scary, I can't believe that major road between Sydney and Adelaide is in the shit conditions it's in. I'll just leave it at that. I've had a memory, walk down memory lane. My God, what a shit road. Anyway, sorry about that, Mike. So I'm happy, I can take up more time if you want, mate, but you're the boss.
The honourable members arrived, so we can probably get back to this.
Would that be the one in the tie?
It would be.
You're not a truckie. How are you, brother? Sorry, mate. My wife sent me back to put long pants on today. She did. I had my thongs on.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you, mate.
We'll get some questions from Glenn later on when the panel. We'll get some questions from Glenn later on when the panel is sitting up here. We'll be able to have a listen. Now, this gentleman over here in a suit and a tie is obviously not a truckie, but that doesn't matter. He is representing our esteemed government. I'm not going to take too much of the mickey out of him. He's on the same side of the fence politically as me, so I can't say too much, particularly if I don't have a go at Glenn. So anyway, the Honourable Sam Farraway MLC is the Minister for Regional Transport and Roads in New South Wales. Perhaps you could talk to him about the state of the road. I don't know. Would you like to come up here and... No. Would you like to come up, sir, and take your place at the microphone, and I'm sure you'll get a fair hearing.
No worries.
Welcome,
Thanks
sir.
for having me. Cheers. Right. Well, okay. So if that's the case, we'll take this off. Take that off. We'll take this off. Take this off.
Can we have some
because the reality is that I don't have an MC or HC license. I'm only small fry. I think I've got an HR. That's as far as I go. So I've only got a baby truck license. But the reality is I'm not a truckie, but I actually owned, with my brother, a civil earthworks and bulk haulage company before I was an MP. Oh. He runs it now. He's got the checkbook. The business is still there, so in one piece, so he's done better than I thought. But the reality is that in opening, and to begin with, obviously to the NRFA, to Rod, to I've seen Simon, I've seen Sal, I've seen a lot of industry stakeholders here, which is good. It's good to see everyone turning up and making the effort, and the rollover demonstration was good. That was good. I made sure we got Rod on TV, so you'll get a bit of a run on Prime there, so that's good. But ladies and gentlemen, firstly, thank you for allowing me to speak at the conference today. My name's Sam Farraway. I'm from Bathurst, Minister for Regional Transport and Roads. I'm the Minister responsible for freight in New South Wales. Became the Minister 2 days before Christmas in 2022. So what I would say from the beginning is that I thought, got a promotion, this is good, let's get into it. Then the floods hit, and then I have not stopped since. Neither has your industry, neither has anyone in New South Wales with what we've gone through in the last 12 months. So from the outset, I want to say thank you on behalf of Regional New South Wales, on behalf of the government, on behalf of obviously the Minister that sits around a cabinet table in New South Wales, to you. Because essentially this state kept moving. This state didn't stall because of the work you did. Whether that be in COVID, and I remember working with Simon, working with NRFA, the ATA, working with Coles, working with Woolworths to get semi-trailers through floodwaters to restock supermarkets in Yamba. I remember working with a lot of trucking operators to make sure that we kept this state moving, that we kept the supply chain as strong as possible. Now, even in COVID, making sure that we had the PCR testing that became part of daily life, and making sure those centres were set up, and making making sure that we just didn't pull them down overnight, and that support was there. So in a genuine and sincere comment from me, thank you. Because the reality is it shouldn't take toilet paper not being on supermarket shelves for truckies to be acknowledged and recognised for the work you do. We need to be far more proactive, to be frank, to make sure that your industry it has a prosperous future, that is progressing, that we're moving red tape, we're doing whatever we need to do to keep things moving. So with that said, what I wanted to do was give you a very quick snapshot of the last 12 months. We've all lived it and breathed it, and thank God it's over, but you don't know where to go next or how to deal with what's next unless you reflect on where you've come from. So firstly, we've seen, and the road is shit. The road is crap. So with a lot of the roads. I'll talk on roads at the end because we have to understand as an industry, as a community, as a society, as transport operators, as government, what our plan is. Because there is no fixing the roads overnight. They are probably, in terms of what we've been through in the last 12 months, I've spoken to Duncan Gay, I've spoken to roads ministers past. None of them can tell me that the network has taken such a hammering, compounded within 12 months so quickly. We're not going to change that. It's how we develop the certainty, the cash, the budget, the plan. And there's so many people involved in that process, but we'll talk about that at the end. What I wanted to talk about in the first part is some of the challenges of the last 12 months. My door from day one has always been open, and it is up to the likes of Sal and Simon and Rod and others to judge me on that. But my door has always been open from day one, dealing with the challenges over the last 12 months, and it has delivered, I think, a lot of meaningful outcomes. We were able to start FTAC. We scrapped all the other ministerial advisory councils. We had one for rail, one for road, one for air, scrapped it all. We brought the ports, the rail, the road operators in the same room. We brought industry leaders into the same room, and I basically don't let them leave the room until they find some common ground. Because the reality is to have a prosperous rail sector, you need a road freight sector, which then intersects with the air freight sector. If we're going to talk about freight more holistically, that's the way we've got to look at it. I chose Duncan Gay to lead that because he knows a thing or two, and he's able to bring a few, touchy personalities together in a room to try and deliver some outcomes. So that was one of the first things we did. There is something called Freight Branch within Transport for New South Wales. I'll be honest, when I turned up, it had a very poor reputation. Truck drivers, rail operators, no one liked them, no one wanted to deal with them. They just said they're bureaucrats that had never been behind a wheel, they're bureaucrats that had no idea really how the freight sector worked. We completely overhauled it, changed where it sat within transport, put it under a bureaucrat that was actually hands-on, put it under a bureaucrat that knows a thing or two in this space, that deals with roads, that deals with rail, that deals with freight, and a nuts and bolts person that actually talks to industry. And again, talk to your industry leaders about that individual. His name's Matt Fuller. That is how I and the government will be judged, is if the bureaucrats are talking to industry and you're having meaningful conversations and getting outcomes. Because we don't need talk fests, we need outcomes. So that's what I'm trying to drive over the last 12 months within government, to be far more customer focused. Because at the end of the day, I'm a small business owner. That's what I did before I was an MP a few years ago. And I understand that you can run your businesses better than the government can ever do that. You just need government to get out of the way. You just need government to give you a clear understanding of policy positions, regulation, and to be frank, how we can reduce red tape, how we can ensure that there are things that are streamlined for your industry and removing some of the clunky nature. And that's honestly what we're trying to do. So over the last 12 months, we've been able to get Freight Branch to be far more customer focused. So when we faced challenges like the rail network that collapsed with sinkholes and slips, and we saw what happened across the state, we were able to get them to kick into gear much quicker. We get specific road briefings for the sector so they know which roads are closed, how transport are working on our state highways, arming industry with the information they need to run their business. We did the same for the rail sector. The feedback is it was helpful. Some were saying to me it's a 20-year turnaround in terms of the communication. That's what we've been trying to do. Is it perfect? No. Is there more to do? Yes. But at least I think we're heading in the right way in trying to change the bureaucrats, trying to change Transport for New South Wales and becoming more customer focused. As a small business owner, that's my little legacy that I'm trying to leave or trying to implement within government and the agency itself. We could talk about the last 12 months forever, but there's no point in the end dwelling on it for too long, because what the industry want to know is where to next. And for me, where to next is we need to acknowledge that the New South Wales freight task, it's going to grow by 34% by 2061. We need to keep pace with that. We need to keep pace with that and to ensure that the state is not held back by congestion, that we find the efficiency in how we move freight in this state, whether it's on road, whether it's on rail. And to do that, we've got to build the infrastructure that's actually going to make a difference. We need to make sure that on the New England Highway, we're going to reduce the congestion around Muswellbrook and Singleton. Early works for Singleton started last month, and for this room, happy to say the Muswellbrook early works, for those that use the New England, will start this month. No more talking about it, the funding's there, the cheque is cut, we're starting the work. We're starting the work in delivering those bypasses on the New England. We've got $1.7 billion going into the Newell Highway. The Newell Highway is a mess. It's a mess, and if anyone has seen south of Forbes, and I live in the Central West, so I live and breathe it, it's been a mess. But we have $1.7 billion going into that highway. It will change it over time, but we need to make sure that we're getting it right. The flood mitigation money that we're being able to now support south of Forbes, it was closed for 49 days. Now, last time we had a flood of the magnitude that hit Forbes recently, it was closed for 6 months. 49 days is not perfect. It's a lot better than what it used to be, but we need to keep moving in this space to work out how are we wisely going to spend money in flood mitigation there to keep that highway connected, because it is one of the most important freight corridors that we have in the state. Now, whether it's the Newell, which spoke about Singleton, Muswellbrook, for anyone that uses the M1, the Pacific Highway, we've 10 years. We've built the Pacific Highway, but we still have these pinch points at Coffs Harbour and M1 at Raymond Terrace. And I'm pleased to say that those two pinch points are now in progress and they're going to be fixed. We've started work on the $2 billion Coffs Harbour bypass. We're building 3 short tunnels. We're going to completely go around Coffs Harbour. Completely go around Coffs Harbour. The M1 to Raymond Terrace, another $2 billion project, it has now started. The contract has been awarded. We're going to get on with it. We're going to get to a point where you can go Sydney to Brisbane without a set of traffic lights. All right? We are going to get to the point where we will have a highway in this state that everyone can be proud of. We just need to fix those last 2 pinch points on that M1, and we will have a piece of road infrastructure that will deliver for this state, for the freight sector for today, but also tomorrow. One of the things that I've been trying to do over the last 12 months is really talk to industry. We held regional freight forums in 6 or 7 locations at the end of last year, and I want to touch on some of the stuff that came out of these forums, because I think it'll speak to exactly some of the themes that will come out of your conference. Number one is clearly rest stops. There's clearly rest stops. I've heard very loud and clear from industry, and I, having a brother and used to, I'll never admit or that I actually worked a lot in that business, but I ran it. I did the HVIS inspections, I paid the regos, I ordered the tyres, I did all that. So I get, I suppose, how important rest stops are going to be in the workplace of a truck driver, in the workplace of a trucking operator. What we do need to do is and I think the previous speaker mentioned it, we just need some better facilities. We need to go and enhance and upgrade the existing facilities, but we also need a very clear plan that when we rebuild new infrastructure, rest stops are at the heart of it for our trucking sector. I can tell you lots of stories about how we're trying to build new rest stops, and there's a lot of, everyone's a NIMBY to some degree. I'm dealing with one on one particular highway where the people where we want to build the rest stop, they do not want a bar of it, but the rest stop has to go somewhere. Our industry, our trucking industry needs it, so it's going to be built, but don't feel as if it's easy. Nothing is easy, unfortunately, anymore, but there is a clear commitment from the New South Wales Liberals and National State Government that rest stops are being built now. We have got a plan to start designing and enhancing existing rest stops, and an example of that would be on the Newell between Moree and Narrabri, where we're going to build one Class 3 and one Class 5 rest stop as part of our $260 million upgrade of the heavy pavement. That's where the rest stop is needed. It's been identified. So we need to build the new rest stops in our new infrastructure, but there's a fair bit of work I think we need to do in retrospectively going back and looking at our existing facilities and upgrading them. And the commitment I give to you is that the New South Wales Liberals and National State Government won't do what other state jurisdictions have done, and that is gone and built and enhanced rest stops without even talking to a truckie. I've discovered that in another state, and I'm determined that that doesn't happen in New South Wales. We need to engage with industry. We have the consultation open right now, and Rod said he's got a 5-page submission all ready for me, which is good. 28th of February that closes, and I've been so clear. I need to hear from you. You need to tell the government, you need to tell Transport for New South Wales what you want in these rest stops. This is the best way to get the outcome you want. Second challenge is clearly the workforce. It is clearly when you have an unemployment rate of under 4% nationally, you have effectively full employment. We have an unemployment rate in New South Wales, the lowest it's been for a very, very long time, if not ever, starting with a 3. These challenges that you are facing in sourcing drivers, in sourcing new staff, is the same challenges that the local Toyota dealer, the local barista, the local plumber is facing, because at such a low unemployment rate, we're all competing for the same person. And when you add mining on top of that and some of the resources sector, it gets really challenging. And what I've been talking to industry groups and some of the larger operators, but also mum and dad operators through our regional forums, is how do we essentially make the pathway to trucking to the road freight sector more sexy? How do we offer a traineeship and apprenticeship? How do we overhaul this in New South Wales that we can actually arm these, perhaps younger people coming through with a career path? How do we show mum and dad that it is a good career path to follow with a good wage at the end? Because it's there. We have to sell it differently. There is a role there for government to support industry. It has to be industry-led to be successful, because you know your industry better than I do. But the reality is there is a role there for government, and I would love to be able to support the industry with that. Because in what I see is we've got more retirements than ever. In my area, the Central West, Maranoa, retired, gone. Graham Burke, gone, retired, sell the equipment. No one is actually replacing that void. No one is replacing that capacity as freight operators. So we need to look at that. The ageing, obviously we have a workforce that is ageing. It is no different, it's no different to the bus and coach industry, the crane industry I talk to as well. We need to overhaul how we do things. We need to show mum and dad, if we're going to encourage more youngsters into this profession, what the career path is, what the potential is. That's certainly something that I'm working on as the Minister responsible for freight. Live traffic, I just want to touch on it very quickly. A huge commitment from me to get every single local government area onto live traffic in the next 12 months. We had 20 onboarded late last year. We've got another 32 coming online this month. This is good for locals, it's good for tourists, but I also think it's good for the trucking and freight sector as well. We need a one-stop shop. You can't be going from website to website, from council Facebook page to the next, trying to look at local road data. We need to be able to get this right. That is why I'm taking it slow and steady, because people say, why don't you just put all the 128 councils on at once? Well, I can tell you from experience that is going to be a nightmare, because we have to make sure that the data is accurate. We need councils to sign up to make sure that they are going to input the local road data properly, because this stuff is going to feed through the Traffic Management Centre to third-party websites like Google Maps, like TomTom, like Waze. It's going to feed into all these third-party websites, and it's so important that if the data isn't correct, it undermines everything. It undermines the live traffic app, all the tools and software that you use. So we're going to get there. We're very determined to try and get better data for our road network out there. I'm not sure if we've got anyone from the LBRCA, but obviously the farm gate access, the trial was successful. It's so good that we've now made that permanent. It's all about cutting red tape, but you've got to have the guts to go and trial that stuff first. We've done that, it's successful, and I think it's been a big step forward for that industry in particular. In closing, let's talk about roads, all right, very quickly. So I can talk to you about the New South Wales Liberals and National State Government. We have invested more than any other state and jurisdiction in the country over the last 4 years into roads. I could talk about that until the cows come home, but the reality is that you want to know what we're doing into the future. We've spent almost $2 billion in the last 4 years. We've been hammered, obviously, right now and over the last 12 months by weather events that no one could predict, compounded by size and scale that people haven't seen before. That is why we're responding with the pothole fund. That's why we're responding with the $500 million that have gone to every single local council. That cash is being injected into bank accounts as of Monday. Here in Wagga Wagga, they are going to receive in excess of $5 million from those two funds put into their bank account to go and fix their local roads. They've got 12 months to spend it. It's up to council, with the cash in their account, to now go and work on prioritising these local roads that locals use every day. We need them to go and do their job, because we have to go and fix the Sturt, we have to go and fix the Hume, we have to go and fix the Newell Highway, we have to go and work on the New England Highway, we have to go and continue to roll out our $20 billion infrastructure pipeline. This is the plan, this is how we're going to do it. Because we're going to get to a point, and I think we're almost there, where the cash is there. The cash, the projects, the will, the agenda's there. It'll be about people now. It'll be about capacity. It'll be about how do we best manage that. That's where to next. But what I want to obviously say is that as of yesterday as well, I made the commitment alongside the Premier and Deputy Premier of this state that we are taking a $1 billion, an additional $1 billion package to the state election. That will mean $400 million going to the local roads for councils, the roads that locals use every day. It will be a $300 million fast-tracking freight program, road and rail. It'll be about overhauling the criteria. It'll be about how we identify the pinch points for our freight sector in both road and rail. And the last piece is a $300 million Build Back Better fund. What we've learned is that if we're going to have the damage that we've had, we have to rebuild it. There are mechanisms there from the Commonwealth to rebuild the infrastructure, but what it means is you can only build it back exactly the way it was, which is ridiculous, to be frank. The federal government, and with respect, the federal government think states gold-plate everything. They think we gold-plate everything. That is why they're not, they haven't been interested in a betterment fund. Now, the way a betterment fund works is that if we have a timber bridge that is burnt by a fire or washed down a river, the disaster recovery funding that comes from the Commonwealth says you've got to build back a timber bridge at the same capacity. Like, how ridiculous is that? They need to be built back with improved approaches. It needs to be a concrete structure, that if the fire comes in, it's still there, that the flood isn't going to wash it down the Richmond or the Tweed River. Like, this is where we're going. This is the next step in road funding and transport funding, in particular in the regions. Because the community are not going to wear building back a timber bridge. They're not going to wear just rebuilding back a local road that needs to be raised. They're not going to wear not just building back the same culverts, the same drainage. So later this month, we will start rolling out meaningful and real betterment projects in northern New South Wales with the Commonwealth that we have funded 50-50. But I just want to explain how important it is to change politicians' and government's agenda around betterment. We have to be serious about it, because there's a big role here for the freight sector. Because to keep your wheels turning, to keep the state moving forward, not stalling, your trucks on the road, keeping our supply chain strong, when we face challenges like weather events, we've got to be able to reconnect the roads quicker. We can't just build back the same infrastructure the same way and then not be able to reconnect communities, the freight sector, the supply chain quicker. That's my agenda. That's where we're trying to go as Liberals and National State Government. Happy to take any questions. There's you could stand here all day about freight, to be frank, and the road sector and what we're trying to do and what needs to be done. That's a bit of a snapshot, but I just want to leave you with that betterment component, because it's really important, not just for your businesses, but for your communities as well. Whether it's a local bridge, a local road, a state highway, how our local roads intersect with state highways and state roads. We've got to change our thinking. That's what I'm driving. And hopefully, we can get a bit more support from Canberra, because we've put $300 million on the table. I'd like Canberra to match it.
Stay there for a second.
Yep. Thank you very much.
If there's any questions, then we'll put a microphone in.
Yep. So all we're going to do now is we're going to take 10 minutes for questions, and we're going to have a couple of microphones going around. Please, if you've got a question, just put your hand up, and we'll be more than happy to...
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. Questions everywhere. Don't take a question from that bloke there. See that fella there? No questions from him, righto? No, Norm, we'll get to you, mate.
Oh, my sparring partner over there. Well, Mr. Graham, he's here.
Your sparring partner's over there.
G'day, my name's Bruce Dodds. I've been on the highway since 1988, doing the Hume Highway. And back then we had crashes every day, but if blokes were tired, there was always somewhere to pull off. Maybe a dirt patch, the RTA, the RMS, or when it was back in those days, the older, just a sand pit area where we could pull off. Now, 30 years later, we've got 3 times the amount of traffic. We've got beautiful roads, although they're not up to the standards they should be. And we've got bugger all parking ways. And no wonder why blokes fall an arse over head every night. And when you blokes build roads, these divided roads, it's great. But think about these poor blokes here, right? They come to a breakdown on the side of the road. There's supposed to be at least a minimum of 2.5 metres from the fog line to the guardrail, right? Half the highway, you only got a metre and a half. This puts these blokes in danger when they're trying to do a recovery. Blokes are not got the eye on the job, on the phone, they're tired. How many truck accidents do we find blokes run up the arse for the blokes, right? There's one problem. If it's 3 metres from the fog line outwards, if you break down, you get off the road, the bloke has to find a parking bay, they can't find a parking bay to sleep in, he can get off the road, right? We're all going to electronic work diaries, I'm on electronic work diaries. The parking bay situation is just diabolical. We've now got blokes running the Pacific Highway, the Coast Road, instead of running the Newell. Therefore, the parking ways out of Sydney, you can go 3 or 4 parking ways out of Sydney and you can't find a park. Electronic work diaries, great things. However, when your time runs out, you enter breach. With a logbook, you can bullshit away, right?
You heard that, Sal?
But when you're 1 second over your time, you're in trouble. And it's electronically logged. Now the blokes at the weighbridge, they said, oh yeah, we'll have a look at it. Bullshit, they will. It costs me. It's not my fault. I can't find a parking way.
I get where you're going, but we all agree. But have you got a question?
The question is, are we going to have the roads made to standards so that these tow truck blokes and blokes who need to get off the road
Righto.
and the parking ways are going to be done in timely position?
Yep. So it's a very good point, and this was raised in all the mum and dad operators I spoke to across those 7 forums late last year. The one thing you forgot that I learnt as well is that where we do have parking bays, you got bloody caravanners in there now. This is the feedback that I've been travelling around the state learning. Also, where some of the bays, because of caravanners and because of the structure, your truck is facing the wrong way. So now your cabin is facing a highway and you don't get any actual meaningful sleep. We are hearing this feedback. The thing is that we need to completely restructure rest stops, parking bays. That is why in our new infrastructure build, we have changed the criteria. They have rest stops and parking bays and emergency bays. They have to take a far greater priority. That is why I was sort of touching on some of the challenges I'm having with people that are objecting to them. Now, I am determined and committed to see it through because I know what the industry needs. But what I'm saying to you as well is behind the scenes, there's a heap of objection to them as well. And that's because people understand and appreciate that truckies need this, but they just don't want it near their house. But we're going to get that with any infrastructure you build. And I get that, but I'm committed to it. But we have learnt from our feedback about more emergency, obviously pull-off bays, parking bays, the rest stops. But even one step further, when we're building all this great infrastructure, we're building these bypasses, we're making our road network more efficient, and yes, there's challenges with damage, and we know that, but also what's been raised with me is that with some of the rest stops and even service centres, how do we better structure that between the private sector and government into the future? Because once upon a time, you'd pull up in a local community and grab a steak sandwich. But you can't now because you're bypassing the community, you've got nowhere to pull up. And then you're pulling up into a rest stop that has no facilities. I get it. I've heard all of this. This is where we are going to have to, when we are recreating and restructuring the absolute priority that this needs to take into the future. Because if we've got electronic work diaries and you need to be compliant, it's the law. It's a bit hard when you don't have the services to support you to be compliant. Well, I get that. It's a state-federal thing as well. I'm not here to try and shirk any responsibility, but what I'm saying is that you need fighters in there who actually understand what is happening, and hopefully I've been able to demonstrate that, because we're going to have to just change the whole way of thinking with rest stops into the future, and even how we partner with the private sector to offer commercial options in these rest stops, about coffee carts or about how we can offer more services. Because if you're on a nice new highway and bypassing a community, if there's no service centre, where are you going to pull up for a feed? I get this is all the stuff we've got to look at in the future, because if we let this go too long, it's very hard to fix.
Perhaps you might like to listen to a grassroots organisation that's run by truck drivers.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm here today. That's why I'm here today.
Can we have Norm, please?
Nola, Bransgrove. In view of trying to get people into our industry, you can't get a licence until you're 18, 19 or 20, hard to get insurance. Is there any chance that you could revisit 16-year-olds getting their forklift licence, so the guys that aren't very good at school like I wasn't can get a meaningful job, end up in the warehousing or work their way up and go driving trucks, or end up in the office, but at least be in touch with the industry?
Short answer is we are looking at, we're talking to, I've tasked Transport for New South Wales to develop a roadmap to actually address the shortfall in the workforce. It's complex. You know it's complex. I know it's complex. We've touched on the unemployment rate. We've touched on capacity. But what we need to do is we need to look at everything. Everything needs to be on the table. And an example is, I was talking to the LBRCA reps earlier. A lot of industry groups are talking about competency-based driving and how do we get the 17-year-old behind the wheel with someone that has been in the industry, that might be coming towards the end of their career but has a huge role to play in training the young person behind the wheel properly for 12 months. So when they hit 18, you have got an employee, a driver behind the wheel that is safe, that is competent, that has a clear career path. Yes, we need to trial this. We need industry on board. I need trucking operators to put younger people in the safest trucks, their newest truck, with all the telematics, with all the kit, with all the gear, because that's the only way you'll get the community on side, to put younger people behind the wheel. I'm not afraid of it. I just don't want to start a trial unless I've got everyone on board and we're going to make it a success. I think it was Victoria that trialled competency-based driving and it fell over as well. I don't want that. I don't want the trial to fail before it starts. But to your point, yes, everything should be on the table. Transport for New South Wales is talking to industry across the board. If they're not talking to the NRFA, they will be come Monday. But the reality is we need to look at everything. But we need a hybrid version that's going to work, because the versions I've seen to date, none of them are perfect. And one of the big things that I've learnt over the last 12 months in this space is the trainers or the RTOs or whoever we're going to get to sign off, they need trucking experience. We can't have someone that is not a truck driver signing off on young truck drivers. All right? So I almost think in the trial you just want the one organisation. You don't want multiple organisations playing around this space in terms of the RTOs. You need one that the industry will support.
All right.
Sam.
We need to sort of shorten the answers, all right?
No, this is a politician. You just keep going. You give me a microphone.
I know, but I'm not allowed to leg rope.
That's all right.
Like I can't do the umbrella from the side like they did on the cartoons.
That's all right.
You're saying a lot I agree with, which is why I'm letting you go on, but anyway.
So, 3 points we would like an answer to. You mentioned the Pacific, you're going to get rid of the bottlenecks. Why is there not a truck changeover facility on the Pacific? I started asking for it 10 years ago. A bloke died because there was nothing for him. That has to be addressed. You talk about the betterment fund. We must get value for money. We can't have blokes throwing a bit of shit on the road and by the time he's gone to the next hole, that one's done and we're just throwing that money away. We must do something about getting value for roads. The overtaking lanes, how many have been rebuilt 4 times? Where does that money come from? And lastly, New South Wales, once you turn 70, you have to do a B-double test every year at your own cost. Why? Can you please address those 3 items?
3 very good questions. With the first question, it's a very good one. Well before my time, it is something that has been raised in the forums. It is something that I've asked Transport to look at their future planning on the M1 about a changeover facility or bay, okay? Because it's been raised with us through those forums that it is something that is needed. I don't know why, to be frank, that it hasn't come to surface. I've been here 12 months. It's something that's been raised with me. We are working on that. It will need to fit in with our infrastructure build and where we put it, but the reality is we need to also engage with industry. I'm not just going to go, if we were to build one, I wouldn't just go and build it without talking to industry because that's the worst thing I could do. Point two was...
Roads, getting value.
Okay, so what we've done recently, I'll give you two examples. With local roads, council roads, the $500 million that we've announced, that I gave that example before, that is not to fill potholes. That is to repair the road. That is for heavy patching. And where there are multiple heavy patches on a road, I've said go and seal it. It's not a form of betterment, it's a form of repair. Because we've gotten to the point that they've got money to fill potholes. That's part of their works program. But the way forward now is repair. Now that we have dry weather, we can actually do repairs. The problem was with relentless rain, there was no opportunity to do repair. There is opportunity to do repair now. On our state highways, so that dealt with local roads, because they've got the cash to do the repairs now, all right? I just announced another $4.6 million for Wagga outside with you earlier. So the money's flowing, all right? The idea is there now let's think and move our mindset to repairs and repairs properly, not filling potholes. On our state roads, which are probably as important, if not more important to this group, is I've worked closely with Transport and I've said, we just need to spend the money. On the Newell, on the Great Western, wherever it is, we need heavy duty asphalt. Now, it's going to cost 3 times the amount in some parts. But the reality is that if we've got more trucks with heavier loads, with more freight, and the freight growing by 34% in this state till 2061, we need to actually start thinking about building this infrastructure for tomorrow, not just today. That's what we're doing. The proof of that is using examples like the Newell, where it's 3 times the cost though. So our challenge is, as managing the budget, is that we need to identify those critical freight corridors, spend the money. So we're doing that on the Great Western, we're doing that on the Newell. You've seen what we're doing on the New England. The Sturt's another one. I've driven the Sturt, it needs a fair bit of work. But we are doing that. We are doing that. With betterment, this is exactly what it's about as well. It's about making sure that we deliver meaningful projects. Part of the problem with flooding is you've got this much water with culverts and drainage that are this big. But these roads were built decades ago. So we need to bring the actual infrastructure that supports that road, we need to raise it dramatically. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing with the Betterment Fund. What was the third part?
The third one is licensing, turning 70 in New South Wales.
It came through the regional forums as well. I've tasked Transport to actually have a look at it, to see that if we can look at that regulation, talk to industry and see what's possible. But it has been raised multiple times. I've instructed Transport to go away and look at it.
Okay. We're just about out of time. We'll just have one more question. We'll just be a quick question and I'll give you a couple of minutes.
Oh, you're dangerous.
That's dangerous. Can you do it?
Yeah.
Right, a couple of minutes.
Tony Madden from Madden's Transport Arden. I agree with what's happened, what you're saying about the weather events that we've had around this area over the last couple of years, and they've been horrific. And we probably haven't seen those since 52 to 56. But Carol Brown announced that they'd be looking at new and existing funding that had been allocated to jobs. Now, the Riverina area here is probably the fruit bowl of the nation. Because we can't access Port Kembla by rail, we've had several landslides this year down in Port Kembla. We've seen more trucks out in this area than we've ever seen in 50 years out here. And they have just pounded the road out of existence. Now, prior to the last Olympics, we started to build a rail line from Malvern to Dumbarton. They spent $20 million building a bridge over the Wallumbilla River, just down from the Picton exit. They excavated the railway line up to where the bottom of the airfield is there, where they do the parachuting. Over the other side, they started the tunnel to Port Kembla. Now, that was in 97 or 98, and I'm not quite sure what government was in then, but we're almost to the next Olympics. And that bridge is standing there rotten. When are we going to finish that? Has there been any talk of this, or to get that line completed? The other thing that was going to happen there, that they were going to open a rail line out to Demonville at Harden, and that would give the rail traffic access to then either go to Sydney, Port Kembla or Melbourne, because as you know, over the Blue Mountains, they have a curfew on the rail. They're not allowed to run freight trains over there when the passenger traffic is on, and that happens at the morning of an afternoon, and then the same thing happens from Sydney down to Port Kembla. And the likes of Arcadia, sometimes it takes them 3 days to get a train to Port Kembla. You know, why can't we get this bridge fund, or that rail line funded and finished from that we've already started? Look, it was $20 million, and the money was withdrawn from that project to build the Olympics. We're going to have the same problem in 32 when the Olympics come. We'll withdraw money from these crucial infrastructure projects.
So the short answer is that Business Illawarra, Port Kembla, New South Wales Ports, they've raised this. That area have been promoting that upgrade of that or to finish that infrastructure with me, with everyone, with the Commonwealth. The reality is it's a question for Canberra, because you have this rail line that just stops. I'll be frank, what cost $20 million in 97 is going to cost about $200 million now. My view is that if the Commonwealth are prepared to come back to the table, the Prime Minister over the last few years has talked a big game about that rail line. He even made commitments, I think, over the last few years, even before he was Prime Minister, when he might have been even Deputy Prime Minister last time, about that rail line. I'll be really frank, New South Wales can't afford to build it. And if John's asked, he'll say the same thing. And if he doesn't, he's lying to you. Because the reality is that is hundreds of millions of dollars. It is, if at a ballpark. And if the Commonwealth come to me with a proposition like how we built the Pacific Highway, 80-20 funding split or something, I'd get interested, because there is benefit there. But honestly, with everything else we're doing, with highway upgrades, with flooding, with road repairs, with rest stop, with everything else we're doing, that one is really tough, because we need the Commonwealth government to get the chequebook out, because it is going to cost. No one has costed it properly. It is frightfully expensive. Doesn't mean it's not a good project. It just means that there needs to be the will of Canberra to really look at it as a piece of rail infrastructure of national significance. Get them to that point and get their chequebook out. We've got something to work with. Okay. Thank you. Cheers. Now, you got to lose the jacket and tie. That's the rule. All right. Thank you very much.
If you want to enjoy your free Wi-Fi, you might need to. No? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached time for a break. We're running a little bit late now because we've gone over time, only 5 minutes or so. So at 11:05. Enjoy some morning tea. It's all laid out up the back for you there, and we'll be back at the tables at 11:05, please. Move along. We've got Mr. John Graham here. He is the Shadow Minister for Roads in New South Wales, and you, sir, shall remain seated and quiet, please.
That's right.
Oh, we've all got questions.
All the questions are from over here. No, fantastic. Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for having me along today. I want to particularly recognise Mike's work on his podcast on the radio, on the road, and I really look forward to seeing where this goes over time. I am the Shadow Minister for Roads in New South Wales, but I'm also the Shadow Minister for Music, so it's a unique combination of my two interests at the moment. And I want to recognise how much Australian music you're playing already.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to seeing how this develops. I'll recognise a couple of other people. Firstly, Rod, for your work, your enthusiasm and your really strong advocacy for the industry. It's just so clear. I caught up with Rod and the board last night. Thanks for making me really welcome last night. Michael McCormack, both for his local role here, but also the role he's played around the country. Look, Tony there was talking about a really tough moment during COVID where the people who are working the hardest up and down the East Coast were not welcome in a range of places up and down the East Coast, as you all know. And I really want to recognise someone who worked with you to tell that story and push back on that, and that's Glenn Sterle, who you all know really well. But I think the campaign that Glenn ran with you to talk about just respect, the sort of issues that Tony was talking about, was incredibly important, and it certainly had a real impact on me and my colleagues as we were thinking about managing that terrible period. So thanks for what you did.
Sorry, John. Can you just put that up a little
Yeah, no worries.
A little bit shy on hearing you. Thanks.
Thanks for what you did. Thanks for what you did during that those tough couple of years. But I particularly want to recognise the work that you've done with Glenn and the work he's done on those issues about basic respect for working people doing a job for the country, about rest stops, about safe driving. That's been so important over time. It is interesting. I finally want to recognise, even though he's not allowed a question, the Minister, Sam Farraway. I'm not supposed to say this, but I will anyway. But look, Sam is one of the best ministers in this government, is the truth of it. And you would have seen from the speech he gave before, he's really engaged in the detail on this argument and many of the issues he raised. Many of the issues like rest stops, like the workforce challenges, like the need for investment around the state and the need to do it better in our roads. They're the sort of issues that really both sides of politics have got to work on together. They're the sorts of issues that shouldn't really be part of a political backwards and forwards where we can manage that. And I think Sam's done a good job of being able to do that, and I certainly want to recognise the role he's played in his time in the job. It's not that we agree on everything, but as an opposition, we've tried to play a role where we can agree, and this was especially important during the COVID period. We will agree on those issues that are really fundamental to the economy, to the community, and I really see this set of issues, the issues that have been raised today, as in that bucket, just so important for the future of the country. It is interesting to have these. This was a hot topic last night. It's been a hot topic of late, but a long-term problem, and it is that rest stop issue, that parking issue, that need for drivers to really get off the road. I'm really encouraged to see just the campaign that's going on at the moment. I think it's hugely important. I commit the opposition to really working with the industry to tackle those issues. I think Sam's been clear, this isn't straightforward, but we have to do better. The message is really clear. I know it's been a problem for a long period of time, but I think you're doing very well putting the case at the moment, and we have to take a step forward in this area. I've been pleased to see the consultation that's rolling out on this. I'm pleased to see Rod involved in the consultation, and also Craig Forsyth. I think that's really important. You don't need my encouragement to have a say on that. I know you'll do that one way or the other, but that's a really crucial moment to try and drive that agenda forward. One of the views that's been put to me, and this is something we have to turn around, is on the east coast, Sydney is really the least friendly place for truckies up and down the east coast. If you think about the lack of parking, if you think about the tolls, the issues we've had with speed cameras, I'll come back to that, but just the lack of rest stops, you'd have to say, if you look up and down the east coast, we've got the least truckie friendly city. And that is something that we really need to work together on and try and turn that round. None of these things are simple, they will be complex, they're going to take time, but if we can work across politics, if we can work with the industry, it is possible to turn those things round. The first step is doing what you've done and really pressing the political system, making the case. And what I can say to you is, the message is being heard. Now we've got to drive those. Now we've got to drive those changes. I do want to welcome the fact that there have been commitments at this election. Sam referred to the significant package which has been set out by the National Party. We'll also be releasing our policy shortly on what we'll be doing for regional roads. We've argued the case strongly, and look, anyone who's been on the roads, I don't need to tell you just how bad the damage is. We've argued the case that councils can't do this by themselves, and that is now being recognised. I do want to recognise the investment that's been committed, but we've also been unapologetic about drawing attention to the commitment that was made last time, the commitment that 15,000 kilometres in New South Wales would be taken off local councils, delivered to the state government to really lift the standard of our road network. And it's good, there are good commitments coming forward this time, we'll be doing the same, but the commitment that happened last time, 15,000 kilometres transferred, not a single one of those roads in regional areas has been lifted out of a council's hands and delivered safely into the state government's hands to really raise the standard of roads across New South Wales. So we've got to get the basics right first, and that these commitments are welcome, but the first thing we've got to do is really deliver on what's been agreed already. I'll touch on just a couple of other things. I'm the Shadow Roads Minister. Part of our team is Jenny Aitchison, the Shadow Minister for Regional Roads. Jenny will be here tonight, so I encourage you to chat to her, and she's up in Maitland. She spends a lot of time travelling around New South Wales, very focused on the regional road issues. I'll talk briefly about two other focuses of mine as I deal more with the urban road network. One of those is on tolls. We've really drawn attention to the fact that a lot of the focus at the moment in New South Wales has been on the toll roads, not the rest of the road network. Now, they're fantastic roads, but the rest of the road network is suffering from a lack of focus, less money, less energy, less commitment, and we will place that focus back on that rest of the road network rather than on simply expanding the toll road network in New South Wales. That's not a political choice, it's the recommendation of Infrastructure New South Wales, who says that should be the focus. We'll listen to that focus, but we'll also tackle directly the high and rising cost of tolls. We won't just do it for commuters, we'll also have a look at what we can do for truckies, for tradies, and you'll see some announcements in the days and weeks to come on that. So I can't go into detail, Mike, today, but I flagged that this is very much in focus for us, and we'll have something to say. And finally, I just want to touch on that speed camera issue, which has been pretty hot in New South Wales. This issue about warning signs for speed cameras, it's important that people drive the speed limit. No one knows that more than you, but one of our concerns has been to maintain community support for the camera program and for safe driving. And the fact that those warning signs were removed without anyone ever being asked about it was something we opposed from day one. it's good to see that the government has now, more than 2 years later, reversed that position, but it really has been just a blow to a common sense approach to dealing with the community and speeding. It gives you some idea of the sorts of issues we're trying to focus on as an opposition, working with the government to build our road network, just the bread and butter issues of tolls and speed cameras that are impacting on people's lives, especially on professional drivers' lives. That's the sort of focus that that we're driving as we come into the election period. But I'm really grateful for being along tonight just to listen and learn. Certainly I got some very direct views last night at dinner, which was extremely welcome, and look forward to having a chat today over a cup of tea.
We're not going to have any questions for my new friend here at the moment, because he's going to be on the panel later on and you'll all get a chance to have a shot at him, and I'm sure some of you might even hit the target. What I'd like to do now, because I know we're a little bit over time, Michael McCormick's here to address you, and I'd like to actually call on you now, sir, to come and say your piece.
Thank you, Mike, and given the fact that we're running over time, I might cut it down a bit. How about that? Awesome. Acknowledge Rod and his team and the work that they do to run your organisation. It takes a lot of work and effort and time and contribution to run organisations such as this, so thank you, Rod. Acknowledge my parliamentary colleague and friend, Sam Farraway, who's doing an amazing job. He turns up, and to that end, when politicians turn up, I think you've got to give them a bit of a tick of approval. Glenn Sterle, where's Glenn? There he is, right behind me. Good-o. Glenn also turns up, and I know the work that he does in the Australian Senate, for it on behalf of truck drivers, for it on behalf of the transport industry, is very much appreciated. And I know when I was for 3.5 years, I call it the golden era of Australian politics, the Deputy Prime Minister and Transport Minister, I had a good ally in Glenn. He doesn't hold back. He does let you know what he thinks, but that's necessary, and I think we need more people like that serving in our parliaments. And to John, thank you too for turning up to Wagga Wagga. This is an important part of the freight network in Australia, and I know when I first became a Member of Parliament back in 2010, somebody at a conference very similar to this said to me that if you can get the Kapuka Bridge fixed, straightened, bypassed, whatever, you will have done your job. Doesn't matter whether you're in Parliament for 2 years or 12 years or however many years, but that is a bottleneck to the Australian freight industry. And that railway bridge there, that dog leg of a railway bridge, had been there since 1880, and the same configuration, and it was a complete bottleneck there just before the Olympic and Sturt highways, and we did fix it. 2016, June 14, it was opened. 27.5 million from the federal government, 27.5 million from the state government. I heard Sam Farraway talk about an 80-20 split there before. This was a 50-50 split, and but it doesn't matter what split it is, because the motorists don't know whether it's 80% federal or 20% state or 50-50. They don't care either. They just expect to get it done, and so does your industry. You just expect to get things done. And I was proud when I was the Deputy Prime Minister that we did contribute, indeed, $110 billion to infrastructure projects, many of which were actually in the road network. That second range crossing at Toowoomba, which meant that a truck driver could drive 140 kilometres without a traffic light set, without having to pull up. Laverton to Winton, the longest shortcut in Australia. Of course, I'm referring to the Outback Way. We pledged that we would seal that road. And indeed, when you look at other roads, the Port Wakefield extension, I could go on and on. But I must admit that you get a lot more things done when you do it in a bipartisan way. Now, I appreciate that John and Sam are both going head-to-head in the upcoming state election. And may the best team win. Of course, I was pleased to hear John talk about the Nationals. And indeed, we do have a big investment. We do have a large stake in regional New South Wales, in regional Australia, and I know Sam is proud of what he's done, and I'm very honoured to serve alongside him as a fellow National Party member. But again, people don't care whether it's National, Labor, Liberal, whatever, they just expect to get it done. But when I was the Deputy Prime Minister and of course that thing called COVID hit, the fact that we were able to get that National Freight Code wasn't perfect, but we were able to get that in place within a matter of hours, not days or weeks or months, meant that people could get their toilet rolls, and everybody expected to, be using 10 rolls of toilet paper every time they went to the toilet. It just became a phenomenon. I'm a folder, not a scruncher, just for the record, but it was unbelievable. We were getting supermarkets cleared out. And everybody was hoarding. But when people do that, the onus of responsibility on those goods being delivered comes down to you people, comes down to the industry. And the industry sometimes gets a bad rap. When you look at the accident rate or the crash rate, it's better to call it crash than accidents because they're not actually accidents, but when you look at the crash rate, in crashes involving a heavy vehicle, it's only about 10% of the time that it's probably the heavy vehicle driver's fault. 90% of the time, it's the other entity involved. And when I heard Tony Madden talking about the descriptive language being used on CVs and other devices, yes, but the trucking industry has come a long way from perhaps even, we'll say, the 70s. And the professionalism shown by truck drivers, by those people behind the wheel, is something to be proud of. One of the things I was disappointed about was the fact that when we were looking at labour shortages and getting people from overseas in, that we didn't probably push the truck drivers as one of those industries where it's a highly skilled industry. I mean, I defy anybody of those bureaucrats, and Glenn will probably back me up here, who were ticking and flicking those sorts of things and making sure they provided the list of skilled and some unskilled workforce shortages that we needed. I'd defy any of them to get in a truck and back a B-double into one of those very, very narrow supermarket places to get the groceries unloaded and then to get on to the next job. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it in a pink fit. And I commend the truck driving industry for what it does, for the safety it shows, for the professionalism it exudes always. But getting back onto that National Freight Code, it happened within hours because I had a good relationship with, at the time, 5 of 8 state and territory entities or administrations were actually Labor. And the fact that I had a good relationship with people such as Rita Safiotti in WA, Jacinta Allen in Victoria and Mark Bailey in Queensland, all Labor ministers, all good Labor ministers, who put the nation and the national interest ahead of any political interest. And we did that in freight. It's a shame we didn't do it in some other areas, but that's why truck drivers who were being held up for at least 40 minutes, if not an hour, over particularly the Queensland-New South Wales border, it then became 4 minutes. And so I thank those ministers again for their cooperation that they showed in the national interest. And working with them was a lot easier than butting heads with them, and particularly butting heads with them in a press conference sense. Because I think sometimes we have politicians who are far too inclined to try to just win a political point in a news conference than actually get things done for the people we serve. And the people we serve are you. The people we serve are those people who expect the freight industry to deliver their goods on time. So I say thank you for doing that. More work to be done, and I know that I had a meeting with the Infrastructure Minister Catherine King this week about what we can do in a bipartisan way and what we can do with the states to make sure that we can build some of those. I heard the fellow from Harden there mention the railway bridge, that sort of a bridge to nowhere. Those sorts of things should be fixed, and I agree wholeheartedly with Sam that that can come from Canberra, but there's also needs to be a willingness, of course, from Macquarie Street. We just need to get on and get things done. I know that certainly when it comes to regulation and red tape, that's always an issue. I know you're going to be hearing from Greg Casey a little bit later on from his experience as a highway patrol officer. These conferences are good places to start to bring about change. And it's not necessarily listening to somebody at the microphone and the podium where you're going to actually be able to affect that change. It's around the coffee urn and the water cooler and the dinner tonight, where swap business cards, make those meetings and then follow up, because that's where you can affect change. And be certain to continue to lobby us politicians, because we are there to serve you. I know you've got listening ears in Glenn and Sam and John, because it's in our best interest to make sure that your industry is its best self. So I thank you. I say welcome to Wagga Wagga. It is a wonderful city to have served for 12 years, but it's a wonderful area, and somebody mentioned earlier that it is one of the great food bowls of our nation. Indeed it is, but it also needs a great trucking sector, and one of the biggest difficulties I hear from local transport operators is the ability to get labour, and it doesn't matter whether it's the freight industry or what it is, right across the board. The labour shortage is something that we are going to have to address as oppositions, as governments at state and federal level, to make sure that we can get the right people in the right places doing the right thing for Australia. Thank you very much.
I think most of them have all gone, but I had past, present and potentially future ministers in the room who I am accountable to. And it is important to just note that I am accountable to the ministers. I'm not an association, I'm a regulator. And it's a really important distinction that I think you guys understand, but can I say, I don't think the bureaucrats or governments do. I am a regulator, I'm not a lobbyist. I do just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. And as I said, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sterle. I am the Chief Executive of the NHVR, and for the last 9 years, and I am going on to my 10th year anniversary, it has literally been a cat herding exercise, and I feel for you, and a lot of our pain are similar to the pains that you feel as well. I think you know who we are and what we do. We are well and truly on the journey of becoming that single regulator. I actually have people in the room today that I will introduce. So I have my Chief Operations Officer here, Mr. Paul Salvati, Bethany McGill and Scott Knowles, who are our stakeholder officers in New South Wales. And I do believe for the first time in this conference, you actually have uniformed officers here, and I have Peter and Chris. And I think that demonstrates to you the genuine commitment that we said we made to this industry, that we were going to be a different regulator. And when you interact with my people, you would interact with them not only on the side of the road, but also in forums like this, where you have the opportunity to come up and speak to them. Because I genuinely believe that if we do that, what Nola mentioned in her presentation and what you heard from some of the earlier politicians may actually start to be achieved. And I'm actually really pleased to say that one of your members came up to me this morning and said, you spoke to us last year in Toowoomba and said you were going to do X, Y, Z. And X, Y, Z was that you would educate, you would inform, and then you would enforce. And we actually probably thought you were speaking shit. And I'll call it as it is, because I think that's what you all thought. And it was amazing to hear from him, you actually have delivered on what you said you were going to do. And that's not me, that's a credit to my staff that are in the room, but that's a credit to allowing us to do what we said we were going to do. So I think I am doing what I've been asked to do, and I'm not talking about it. And hopefully you're seeing that, and hopefully you are seeing the benefit of a single entity, because I firmly believe we have made a difference. And I firmly believe that if we weren't here, I don't think you would be where you are as a sector, and I think a lot of your issues would be far worse than what they are now, because I am seeing a contraction from some of the government agencies to restrict and restrain rather than open up. But anyway, that's why I'm paid the big bucks, they reckon, to do this job. So we are a body, we're a body that wants to work, we're a body that's tasked. I implement legislation that's given to me. I don't agree with the legislation. I think it needs a massive level of reform, as Nola's picked up on. But we're moving on to 5 years before that legislation is going to hit the desk. And that's not sustainable in an economy or a country of this size if we're going to be competitive. We want to maintain a safety outcome and deliver on outcomes. 197 heavy vehicle incidences, fatalities last year, out of 150 odd something. The highest, I think, in nearly 10 years. And the numbers for the first 6 weeks of the year are already trending at around 26. So we're still killing too many people on the road. And yes, the interaction between light and heavy is normally the lights don't come off well, but we're still losing drivers, and that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable if we want to attract, it's not sustainable if we want our people to come home, but we all play a part in ensuring that we do it better. and I'm saying all. We play a role, but you as industry, you as individuals, you as trainers, you as operators, you as owners, all play a role. And the driver shortage, I don't think, is going to go away. And unfortunately, we might see more of Tony's situations, and that's not good for this country, because I think that'll put pressure on proper training, on everything else that we want. So if we're genuine, we all have to play our part. So I'm well and truly on my agenda and my commitment to deliver the reform agenda. New South Wales was transitioned last year. After I spoke to you in February, we transitioned New South Wales in August. I'm really pleased to say that that transition is going well. I have a fantastic group of officers now that have joined, that have embraced the approach that the regulator wishes to undertake around that educate, inform, and then take the appropriate actions. We're working on Queensland, and hopefully we should get Queensland over the line by the end of the year. That will have been a 10-year journey to establish what ministers signed off in 2014, which was a single national regulator implementing 796 pages of crap. And sorry, it's the reality, because we all have to deal with that legislative framework. It is too complex. It is difficult. It doesn't make sense. It is not relevant of the current environment that you work in, the technology that you deal with, the vehicles, the standards, the processes. It is outdated, so we need to fix it. We know that. And I do believe that I will give you a consistent approach. I'm hoping we get a consistent set of new legislative frameworks, and Nola, I'm pleased to hear that you guys are driving that agenda, but we need to get onto it faster. And I know you appreciate that in your dual roles, but we need a sensible legislative reform, not a legislative reform that goes to the common lowest denominator, because we have a jurisdiction that doesn't want to budge, and that's where our ministers need to step above and tell the bureaucrats what's required, rather than the other way around. I'm hoping you're seeing that we are delivering on the things that we had said we would do. I think we are becoming more consistent in our approach. Our borderless operations does mean that my officers can interact a lot more closely with each other in the way they do things. We still share some of the frustrations that you do, particularly around access and what can be done. The road managers are the road managers. We understand that, but I would prefer probably a more open dialogue on the value that we bring to the table around the discussion on what we can do to simplify and make some of those access provisions a lot easier. As I've said, we're embarking on that approach. We are taking a risk-based approach to the way we do things. If you're doing a good job, keep doing it. Tell your mate how to do it. But if you're not, expect a visit. I think you would all expect that from me. You don't want to see your mates killed because someone hasn't done the right thing on the road. You've all told me that. So don't get the shits when I'm doing my job. Maybe congratulate us when we're doing our job. Let me know if I'm not doing it properly, because I think I've demonstrated that we're listening and we'll fix. But you know, my officers are human too. And they don't mind that you've done a good job today, mate. Thank you very much for telling me that there was an issue there. Instead of shit, here's another blister. Or maybe I'm making you get home safely. So we're putting a lot of time and effort in what we do in training, in educating our officers, and they're embracing that. And I've been on the road, and that interaction now is very much more like, hello, how are you, driver, today? How's it going? Yes, thank you very much. And that's the respect that needs to come back into this industry, because Tony, you are right, we hear those things on the radio. And I'm really concerned that I think there is going to be something serious happens on this network. We've lost the Australian culture of you're a mate and I'm going to help you. And that's not sustainable, and this industry won't be sustainable. And to some degree, what Tony said of the cause is probably something that we all need to deeply reflect, because I don't think there will be a sustainable transport sector that was the grassroots of everyone in this room, because it will be big businesses driving that agenda. I've still got my job to do, but I want you as part of that job because we like working with you. So we continue to drive that focus on safety. We really continue to drive on simplifying what we've got, and I think we're doing a pretty good job. And we won't walk away from the inform, educate, enforce and monitor, but expect us to come down quite hard where there are activities that aren't appropriate. And that's across the supply chain. I think what we've demonstrated to you over the last sort of 12 to 18 months is that we're moving away from driver. We're moving up the chain. Our prosecutional activities are up the chain. We are holding directors, we're holding executives to account. That's That's what you've asked us to do. I can't turn my eye off those who are on the road, but our focus is on the chain, and we will continue to do that. This one is a constant one, and we are listening. We are working closely with police. We're endeavouring to align as much as possible the way we implement the law with how they do that. And our interaction with the agencies continues to improve on a day-by-day basis, where we're sharing information, where we're actually sharing joint operations, where their officers are actually watching my officers undertake their tasks. And that's a positive. This will take time. They are authorised. They are authorised under their own police powers. They're authorised under the HVNL. They implement state laws as well. But I am seeing a genuine, at least at senior levels, commitment to see more alignment. And that will be a good thing. I don't think they have the same resources available to be doing all of the remedial type activities. And if we can get clarity around what the role the regulator does to what police does, hopefully you'll see a better outcome in that space. But it is a constructive relationship. It is a constructive partnership. We're entering into MOUs. We're sharing data and information. So hopefully over time we can start to address a number of the issues that I've heard through these various forums. I do want to touch on some of the work that we have been doing in terms of fatigue. The view that the regulator took was that while the review of the law is underway, the reality is that even with a decision read at the end of the year before it goes through drafting and adoption, it's still probably another 2.5, potentially 3 years away. We felt that it was more important to actually try and work within the current frameworks. So we've actually started a broad program around how we actually make AFM more accessible. We believe AFM actually is a very viable tool to actually manage your fatigue requirements. It's tailored to the operators and the way they manage the individuals that work for them. We're looking at simplifying the approaches. We're looking at creating more tools to allow it to be much more user-friendly. We're codifying the process into the portal so it actually does a lot of the things that you need to do. So in effect what we're doing is demystifying what has been notionally known as it's too hard to be an AFM, and I have to be a very big operator and I have to spend a lot of money to do that. We think you don't. We think we can provide you with the capabilities and the tool sets to give you what you need, which is ultimately the flexibility to work within the framework that keeps you safe when you need to. And from our experience, most of the operators who are in AFM never use the provisions of the outer limits. They actually work within it. It's a just in case I need it. And for us, that's fine, because we then know that you're putting the appropriate measures, the training and effort into keeping your businesses safe. We have been engaging with industry. We're going to go back out to industry with some of the work we're doing in that, and we'll be keen to understand your feedback in that regards. As I said, there's the more transparency that we would like to do. It's really then about tailoring some of those options and then being able to pull that down. So over the coming year, you should see more in this space. It will reduce that complexity, the duplication, but engage you as operators more closely in being able to provide your drivers with the tool sets that they need. I love coming to this conference because you are the most vocal advocates of the adoption of electronic work diaries. I don't need to say anything more. You're doing it for me. You've seen the benefit that systems or those systems provide you in terms of removing those administrative blisters that you continually tell me about. What I'm pleased to say is that we've now got, I think, 9 approved systems on the market. At the end of last year, we approved our first AFM in an EWD. So there's now no boundaries in terms of what adoption of the electronic systems are. You've heard me say it before. I don't make the rules, but you've heard me say it before. I think these should be mandatory. These remove all the issues that you guys grapple with on a day-to-day basis. It levels the playing field. Yes, I get your comment that maybe there's the 1 minute, but I don't believe any of my officers have infringed anyone who's got an EWD for a minute. And we need to work through that, and that's the legislative framework. So EWDs, I think, are a good tool. It's a tool. It doesn't manage fatigue. It counts time in an electronic format that stops those miscalculations or those errors in a book that result in a $600 figure. Fatigue is managed to a whole lot of other things, whether that's technology, systems or processes. This is one of the tools. It's a tool that we've provided to help make your jobs and lives easier. So for us, the next 12 months, as I said, we're going to continue that work to really get that stronger relationship with the policing agencies, to get that commonality and approach. We have heard industry, we hear it loud and clear. We're going to continue with that focus on safety on our roads. We don't want to see 197 Australians killed. No one does. We need to have more focus on trending that figure down and working more closely. We will deliver on those fatigue outcomes to make it simpler. I'm hoping there will be a larger uptake of electronic work diaries. And then the icing on the cake is hopefully we'll get Queensland over the line and we will be truly a borderless regulator. And then I'm going to go have a chat to Glenn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Greg Casey, former Highway Patrol officer, now retired, so he can actually speak his mind. Thanks, mate.
The opportunity to speak to you today came about a few months ago when I was having a chat on the phone with Rod Hannifey. And during that conversation, my relatively recent retirement from the police came up. And I mentioned to Rod that one of the things that I missed the most since I retired was my interactions with truck drivers. But I meant that in a very positive way. And Rod told me he thought that was a very interesting thing for an ex-Highway Patrol cop to say. And shortly after asked me if I'd be happy to come and speak to you today, and obviously I jumped at the chance. So what I hope to do today is give you a perspective of the Highway Patrol from the perspective of a Highway Patrol officer. But one thing I won't do is stand here and blindly defend the Highway Patrol. They're a cohort comprised of all different types of people from all different backgrounds and with different levels of experience, knowledge and different motivations and priorities. And I readily admit that there are many occasions when individual Highway Patrol officers could have handled things differently. And Nola, I acknowledge what you said before, certainly do. But as a supervising sergeant for the last 13 years of my policing career, I constantly offered guidance to my subordinate staff. But I was only one, and I can't stand here and offer a critical appraisal of the hundreds of decisions made by enforcement officers all across the state on a daily basis. All I can do is tell my story and offer my motivations for taking the approach that I did. Overwhelmingly, my interactions with truck drivers were positive. In contrast, many car drivers think they're perfect and willingly offer their advice on how the Highway Patrol should do their job. I once sat in on a lecture by a prominent road safety expert who commented that when he entered the road safety world, he was so pleased to have so many other experts to give him advice about how to do his job. When I received this kind of advice, it was usually during a car traffic stop. Invariably, I was told that my focus should be on something other than what that person had been stopped for. If they were stopped for speeding, then apparently the focus should have been on mobile phones. If they were stopped for them on their mobile phones, the focus should have been on speeding. And then, of course, there was always the old chestnut, why aren't you out catching murderers? Well, they always offered to go out and catch the murderer if they could point the homicidal maniac out to me, but ironically, no one ever could. The point being that in most cases, car drivers were generally looking for an excuse or simply denying that they'd done what I'd just seen them do. And in the latter half of my career, that meant that I'd also caught them on video. But with truck drivers, most of the time, there was an acknowledgement of what they'd done. If I stopped the truck driver for speeding, there was rarely ever any argument, and this was generally the case for any other kind of driving infringement. With truck drivers, there was rarely any argument or pushback, just an acknowledgement of their actions. And the important thing here is that this opens the door to a conversation about how to avoid these things in the future. Frequently, I had the satisfaction of getting a thank you handshake from a truck driver who I just spent time with, explaining how to restrain a load so that it complied, or issuing a defect notice for a range of issues on the truck that, to that point, the boss had refused to fix. I even had thank yous from truck drivers who I'd grounded for 24 hours on the basis of fatigue, because they were grateful to be able to tell the boss that they'd been directed to get the sleep they so desperately craved. And I always got particular satisfaction from the time I spent going through a work diary with a driver when I was told, nobody's ever explained it to me like that before. Because I knew at that point that this driver now had the knowledge to avoid those pitfalls in their work diary and that they were grateful for that knowledge. It's this kind of thing I meant when I told Rod that I missed interacting with truck drivers. Denial or argument from car drivers was more often than not the norm, around about 70% of interactions. But with truck drivers, denial or argument was rare, say about 10%. And for the 90% of other truck drivers, most issues were resolved by conversation. And I'd like to think that they came away from it all with strategies to help them avoid those things in the future. And that was what I always felt was the point of my job, to prevent. How and why I got to that point is probably best explained by giving you a bit of a background as to how I got into the highway patrol in the first place. When I first joined the New South Wales Police Force in 1987, all I knew was that I wanted to be a cop. I had a few ideas about where I wanted my career to go, but I decided not to commit until I had a better idea of what the job felt like. Eventually I landed at the Green Valley Police Station in southwest Sydney. And for those of you that know it now, it was vastly different back in those days. It was a busy station, made all the busier by having a crew of only 3 of us on each shift, including 2 part-time police rescue operators and a police rescue truck. The rescue area stretched from Blacktown to just north of Mittagong and from Penrith to Lakemba. Although I was the only one of the 3 who wasn't rescue trained, I did attend almost every rescue job with the trained operators, and if the job was within our normal patrol area, I also got stuck with the investigation and paperwork. But attending virtually every serious road crash that happened in southwest Sydney whenever I was on duty had a big influence on my career path. There are only so many road crashes you can attend before your mind turns to how these crashes can be prevented. The catalyst for me was a crash that's always stayed with me, and whenever I see a Honda Prelude, I'm reminded of it. It occurred on a summer Sunday afternoon in Camden Valley Way at Catherine Field in 1988. Back then, Camden Valley Way was a narrow road with a single lane in each direction. And a family were out for a drive in Dad's new Honda Prelude, and they were heading north. And a young guy heading south with more than a few beers on board was speeding and overtaking. As he approached the Honda from the opposite direction, the rear of his Holden utility stepped sideways and into the path of the Honda. Because of the Honda's wedge shape and low front edge, the ute rode up over the bonnet on the driver's side, and the ute's rear axle penetrated the Honda's windscreen, hitting the driver in the head and killing him instantly. The crushed roof trapped the driver's wife and 2 small children in the Honda. Now, this family had gone from having a lovely family day out to being trapped in a car with their now dead father and husband. No doubt those few seconds changed the course of that family's life forever. But it also determined my career path. The desire to try to do something about road crashes before they happened was cemented in me. And this has always been and continues to be the force that motivated me in my work and now in my research. So in 1990, I transferred to the Highway Patrol, and what was then called L District, which included both the St George and Southern Shires in Sydney. The Highway Patrol course was conducted at the Police Driver Training School, which was then at St Ives. And I think the police shulled that shortly afterwards because they realised the value of the land at St Ives that it was sitting on. But throughout the 5 weeks of driving and lectures, training around trucks was minimal. Essentially, I came out of it knowing what a truck looked like, and that was about it. It wasn't that I didn't want to deal with trucks, I just didn't have the knowledge or the confidence. So after 5 years of working in L District, I moved to the country, brought me here to Wagga Wagga, where I lived and worked for 15 years. Now, while the Sturt Highway runs through Wagga, our area of responsibility also included parts of the Hume, the Olympic and the Newell highways. So that meant that many capital city journeys up and down Australia's east coast or across the country came through our area, and that inevitably brought us into regular contact with long-distance truck drivers. It was about this time that I realised that the motoring world looks very different from the perspective of a truck driver. I still recall my first foray onto the Hume Highway in a Highway Patrol car. I was driving northbound through Tarcutta long before it was bypassed, and I decided to turn on the UHF, and that was a form of communication I hadn't had much to do with at that point. One of the first things I heard as I was following a B-double through the village was, double one on your back door and the double out of the cutter, windscreen southbound. I had no idea what that meant. But after listening in for a little longer, I worked out that I was in fact the double one, and it was me causing all this chatter. I decided at that point that I had to learn what seemed like a new language. Over the years, I got to the point where I could hold a conversation with a truck driver who thought he was actually speaking to another truck driver. Sort of like learning to speak Vietnamese and nailing it. But there was a serious side to it. It deepened my understanding of the world in which truck drivers live and allowed me to communicate to a far greater level. There were many instances where this communication ability worked well, both for myself, the truck drivers I was talking to, and the road using public. Police radio frequently broadcast keep a lookout for messages involving vehicles that were driving dangerously or wanted in connection with some offence. The easiest way to get a good scan of the road was to ask passing truck drivers. It wasn't unusual to successfully locate a wanted vehicle or remove a dangerous driver from the road purely because of the help we'd been given over the UHF by those truck drivers. And you can't do that with a car driver. In other examples, we'd sometimes have difficulty locating a car crash because the car had rolled off the road or into the bushes or down an embankment. From our low riding perspective, it was difficult to locate these scenes, particularly at night. Yet truck drivers riding high in their seats were often able to help us pinpoint these crash locations and get other emergency help straight to the site. And you can't do that with a car driver either. Often, if I wanted to stop a truck, I found it easier to simply ask the driver to pull up over the UHF somewhere. They knew their truck and knew where it was suitable to stop it, and I found this method always seemed to start things off on a positive footing. And when a car crash or other incident blocked the road, it was so much easier to keep truck drivers updated over the UHF. At these kinds of scenes, many car drivers would demand to know what was going on and how long the delay was going to be, because their need to get through was more important than anybody else's. But truck drivers would either work out their own diversion or make the best of the delay by having a rest. Very early in my time at Wagga Wagga, I realised I needed to learn more about trucks and the transport industry. So I completed a 2-day course at Goulburn Police Academy about trucks, but it really wasn't enough to help me deal with what I was seeing on the road. There were and still are some very knowledgeable and good highway patrol officers who have been dealing with this stuff for years. So I sought them out, as well as doing my own research and learning and getting trained in ECU downloads and load restraint, and I did some tertiary study as well. But the constantly changing transport industry environment meant that the learning never stopped. By working with other knowledgeable police and other agencies such as the RMS, as it was until recently, I continued to build and share my knowledge amongst many less experienced highway patrol police who were still encountering the same lack of training about truck laws and the transport industry. And that situation is also mirrored across Europe. Many of the city-based police I worked with when I returned to Sydney avoided dealing with trucks because they lacked knowledge and confidence, and they didn't want that to be shown up in front of a truck driver. But by guiding them through the technical and legal minefield that is transport industry enforcement, their interest in doing it properly was sparked. By the time I left the police, I felt that I'd built a reasonable level of knowledge, and that by sharing it with other police, I hope I've left some of that knowledge behind. So what is it that motivates a highway patrol officer to stop a particular truck? Well, frequently and quite reasonably, we'd get asked by a driver why we stopped the truck. Sometimes it's because of the manner in which the vehicle's being driven. Other times it's just a random inspection. Sometimes it's because we had concerns about the condition of the load, such as an overloaded skip bin, unrestrained barrels, loose webbing strap, or a curtain bulging outwards. Other times it's because there's something indicating there's something not right with the vehicle. Often little issues revealed bigger issues after we stopped it. Sometimes the conditions in which some drivers were being forced to work was an absolute disgrace, such as a collapsed seat that the driver had packed with a beach towel to stop the springs sticking into him, or a seatbelt that didn't work, or brakes that didn't work, or suspension that had collapsed. Overwhelmingly, these truck drivers were happy to present the boss with a defect notice so that they didn't have to drive a truck that probably wouldn't have met third world standards. There were also many occasions when drivers initiated their own stop over the UHF or by voluntarily pulling into an RBT or inspection site. This might involve anonymously passing on information about a bad company practice that could support an audit, or issuing a defect notice to fix the things on the truck that the boss had been refusing to fix. Not only was I pleased at the trust these drivers had placed in me, but I also hoped that these interactions had reduced some of the stresses these drivers were under. Given my motivation for joining the Highway Patrol to prevent road crashes, I ended up employing a 2-stage process to help me consider what action I'd take at the roadside. First, as I gained more knowledge and experience, I prioritised my responses based on a link between a law and safety or mobility. I made sure I understood any safety or mobility links so that I could explain it and justify it. If I couldn't find that link, it didn't mean that I ignored that law, but it just became a lower priority. To use some real examples, apart from the obvious safety links such as speeding, drink driving, drug driving or using a mobile phone, there are many other issues an enforcement officer can look for that have a direct safety link, such as a ute with dangerously modified suspension, or a car with wheels that are too big and tyres that are too small, a ute carrying far too much weight, a car towing an insecure load that was also too heavy, a ute with a load that was dangerously insecure, or something we used to see frequently, a truck with a 4.5 tonne GVM, the driver of which thought that meant they could carry 4.5 tonnes. And just for the record, that one topped out at 7.5 tonnes. Cases like this that risk a road crash that could result in anything from a non-injury crash to a fatality make it easier to find that safety or mobility link, or both. Even if there's no crash, a load loss or a breakdown on a major road, particularly around Sydney, means traffic delays and disruption for many people. I frequently engage with the drivers of vehicles like these, who put the safety and mobility of everyone around them at risk, like those heading to work or to their own small business, truck drivers doing local or long-haul work, people heading to medical appointments or to hospital for life-saving surgery, or people on their way to the airport for the holiday of a lifetime. Certainly, however, there are some times when a driver's best efforts can't foresee everything. Like when one of your cattle decides to get in with the sheep. While this was clearly beyond the driver's control, we did participate in the challenge of helping him find somewhere he could offload the stock so he could restore order to it. The second stage of the process was how to deal with the driver, and this applies whether it's in a car or a truck. Remembering that my main aim was always to prevent the situation from happening again. Many things influenced my decision-making process, not least of which was the attitude and demeanour of the driver. At the outset, I can confirm that being subject to abuse, foul language or violent threats is not part of anyone's job, whether it's the police officer, the enforcement officer or the truck driver. The small percentage of drivers that start off with abuse likely end up with a different outcome than they otherwise would have if a civil conversation had occurred. The reason being that it's impossible to educate or explain things to someone who refuses to listen. Hence, in those abusive situations, the options available to influence someone's behaviour diminish, invariably resulting in the issue of a fine or fines rather than a conversation. But with 90% of truck drivers, the educational part of my interactions was something I really enjoyed. And it wasn't just me that was doing the educating. It was through these two-way conversations that I learnt so much about the kind of things that affect the decisions drivers make on the road. If I told the driver that the way to comply with the law is to do X, the driver might tell me that it's impossible to do X because the boss told him to do Y. And if he doesn't do Y, the boss either doesn't pay him for that job, doesn't pay him at all, or sacks him. In those circumstances, a compromise was reached, which might involve a fine for something the driver could control, and or a number of warnings, some advice regarding how to avoid these issues in the future, and often some good intelligence for us about how the company was operating in regard to compliance with their legal obligations. When I look back at my career, I realised there was a time when I lacked any understanding of why some truck drivers did the things I saw them do. This lack of understanding meant that my actions at the time weren't always an effective response to the situation. But over the years, I was able to develop a much greater appreciation of the things that motivate truck drivers' behaviour. And that appreciation came from the conversations I had with truck drivers on the road. By taking a bit more time with these drivers, I gained a deeper understanding of what motivated them and the pressures they were under. These conversations opened up a whole new world of issues in the lives of truck drivers that I hadn't realised before. I thought about how driving for a living changes the deterrence dynamic that a lot of behavioural road safety countermeasures are built upon. While a car driver might lose their licence, they can generally still go to work and earn a living. But I recognise that what happens from the road for a truck driver sometimes equates to whether they can earn a living or not. And it frequently equates to how much pay is taken home to pay the mortgage, the school fees, the living expenses, to look after the family, and in the case of owner-drivers or small operators, to pay off their truck, pay their employees, pay for maintenance, insurance and all the other business expenses and taxes they have to pay. There's a bit of conversation on this in the morning, but when I hear about truck crashes in the media, my thoughts immediately turn to all of the circumstances that led to the crash. What sort of pressure was the driver under? Who put that pressure on him or her? Was the road a contributing factor? Was there an issue with the truck? What was the weather like? What were the other drivers involved doing immediately prior to the crash? It should be heartening in the road safety field. It's becoming increasingly recognised that there are gaps in crash investigation skills and practices, such as the general tendency to look only for the last action of the driver immediately before the crash, kind of like only looking for the final straw. From a scientific perspective, this is seen as a lost opportunity to collect detailed data about the many factors that contribute to a crash. Ideally, improved crash investigation would mean that all of the circumstances that contributed to the crash were investigated and identified, and responsibility could be shared, and countermeasures could be determined and implemented so that, to borrow the saying from about the straw that broke the camel's back, all of the straws, and not just the last one, are taken off the back of the camel. This might mean that crash investigation could look something like the investigations conducted after a plane crash. I've never heard a media report describing that the pilot crashed the plane, nor shall we be hearing reports that say the truck driver crashed the truck, without reference to all of the contributing factors. Enforcing road transport law by going up the chain is no simple task. The complexity and time required to investigate others in the chain of responsibility doesn't provide the quick result that some enforcement organisations prefer. However, regardless of the complexity and elongated outcome, going up the chain was a job that I gained great satisfaction from. The circumstances that give rise to truck drivers' behaviour won't change if little pressure is brought to bear on others in the chain of responsibility. And I hope that those up the chain who were the subject to my actions are at least now more conscious of their own responsibilities. At the beginning of 2022, I started my studies towards a Doctor of Philosophy degree. When I looked up the word philosopher, it came back as essentially someone who thinks about things. Now, while I'll be doing my thinking fully clothed, my philosophy doctorate means that I'll be thinking about truck drivers, the environment they operate in, and the things that influence what truck drivers do. It's an extension of the thinking I've been doing for years. Statistics, research and transport industry organisations all tell us that truck driver fatigue is still recognised as a major issue for the Australian transport industry, where it remains the single largest factor in truck driver deaths and a key risk to safety. Remembering that truck drivers are the last link in the chain and the ones bearing the highest risk, the main aim of my research is to understand from a truck driver's perspective the things that influence truck drivers' beliefs, attitudes and behaviour regarding truck driver fatigue. Academics can conduct research and provide policy options. Politicians can create the rules and laws. Bureaucrats can deliver it. And transport company managers can build guidelines around it. But it's truck drivers that experience it at the street level. I used to hear almost every day about the things that affect drivers, what motivates them to comply, and the challenges they face regarding compliance. And because of this, I respect and appreciate the depth of knowledge and experience they have. While I also intend to interview company managers and law enforcement officers, the people I really need to help me dig deeply into the kinds of things that influence truck drivers are truck drivers. My plan, once I have approval from my University Ethics Committee, is to approach organisations such as the NRFA to ask for assistance in reaching out to truck drivers and managers who might be interested in assisting me by participating in an interview as part of my research. So when I get to that point, I'll be asking for your help. But in asking for that help, I'd also like to emphasise that I am no longer a police officer. I'm a university student. So whatever's discussed will and must remain confidential, because if it's not, I risk 4 years of my life's work going down the drain. So I can give you that guarantee. What I hope to discover from my research is not only what works for truck drivers, but why it works. And not only what doesn't work for truck drivers, but why it doesn't work. From this, I hope to be able to identify contrasts between what I learn in the interviews and existing strategies, which I hope will lead to the identification of policy and practice concepts that can work better for truck drivers, for their families, for their colleagues, and for everybody we all share the road with. So once again, it's about prevention. I hope that what I've discussed today has provided a different perspective of the Highway Patrol from the perspective of a former Highway Patrol officer, and that you have some insight into the influences on enforcement officers and why they might do what they do. Perhaps some truck drivers see their relationship with enforcement officers as adversarial, a struggle for supremacy of one over the other. But from a personal level, adversarial isn't how I saw it. And the longer I spent doing the job, the more I came to understand about the drivers I was interacting with. I'm grateful to the transport industry and those that work in it for allowing me to learn so much about it. Even though I worked amongst it for over 30 years, I never stopped learning. I always gained satisfaction from learning about how transport policy affected drivers at the front line. I never stopped enjoying the conversations I had with drivers and operators about compliance and safety issues. I never stopped enjoying a handshake and a thank you from drivers who appreciated learning something that no one had shown them before. I never stopped appreciating the assistance from truck drivers when we were looking for a crash scene or a wanted vehicle, or their patience when the road was blocked because of some kind of incident. I never stopped enjoying helping drivers who had been trying to get the boss to fix defects on their truck, or drawing attention to companies about whom drivers shared insights regarding compliance and non-compliance and unreasonable pressures being put on them. When I left the police, I knew that my interactions with truck drivers would be one of the things that I missed the most. But through my research project, I look forward to getting back to interacting with and learning from the transport industry. Thank you.
A few questions.
The fray.
Yeah, excellent.
Ah, thank you.
Excellent.
I'm just wondering, thank you for your speech, it was terrific, and thank you for the care of our people on the road for so long. Are you by any chance involved in any sort of training of officers coming along now?
Not at the moment, but it was a big thing for me prior to leaving. One of the sections that I got involved in when I went back to Sydney from Wagga was a specific heavy vehicle unit, and that unit recognised that there was a lack of training and experience, because you can put people in a classroom for 4 or 5 days, but unless they go out and practice it, they don't build the confidence, they don't build the knowledge, they don't build the practice. A lot of them, particularly with a lot of the heavy vehicle national law stuff, would struggle to put a brief together because of all of the points that have got to be addressed in order to present a successful brief to a magistrate. One of the other things that I tried to teach them is if they're looking at a work diary and there's 100 things wrong with it, some big things, some little things, you don't need to lay 100 charges. There was a particular protocol that I used to use called the Hamsey protocol, and what that meant, it came about, it was a higher court decision where a fraudster was put before the court for 100 frauds. But rather than laying 100 individual charges, they laid one charge with an indictment that read that the accused did, on 100 occasions, commit fraud. Right? Now, I used to use that frequently because if, for example, a truck driver had failed to add up the hours, and that had occurred, I used to use like a 1, 2, 3 principle. 1's a mistake, 2's an oversight, 3's probably something we need to pay attention to. But if that truck driver had maybe done that 80 times, I didn't lay 80 charges, I laid one charge saying that the accused did on 80 occasions between this date and this date failed to total the hours. So I used to use that fairly frequently, but that's not something that a junior constable would be able to pick up on day one. It takes years and years and years, and like I said, I was doing this for over 30 years and I never stopped learning. So we can't expect, even if we improve the standard of training to a national standard level, we can't expect the people that have just finished that training to have 30 years of knowledge and experience. I certainly recognise it's an issue. When I finish this PhD, that is certainly something I would like to look at. But there's a lot more involved in a PhD than I originally thought, so it's keeping me quite busy at the moment. So, yeah.
So I have two questions for you.
Yep.
The first one is, how do we then change the attitude of the people doing the wrong thing in the highway patrol? So you said your interactions were mostly good. There's a few, like, had a bad day. Your blokes are entitled to have a bad day as well.
Yep.
But those that go out there and hammer us and mean that we lose drivers and things, is there something we can do there? And the second question is, with your research, how much of this is being done? Like, you know, we've got our industry associations, we've got others that you would like to think would do this sort of research to help us. And I'm sure Sal's really interested in any sort of research that can be put forward to promote a case for better safety, no matter who it comes from or how it's done. But geez, you know, why haven't we done some of this stuff before? And it's really good to see that you're doing it from that point of view.
Yeah, look, I'll answer your second question first. When you put a research proposal together, one of the key things is you've got to identify a gap in the literature. So I can guarantee, or at least the people who said I can do this, also accept that this hasn't been done before. One of the things that I'm told is unique is that when people approach a PhD about a topic, they don't usually come at it with 30 plus years of experience and practice. So that is what I think will make my approach and my research different to anything that's been done before. Although my principal supervisor keeps telling me I've got to take off my practitioner's hat and put on my researcher's hat, because the idea is that I can't go into it with any preconceived ideas, I can still use my knowledge and experience to sort of head off other issues. As far as your first question, training the highway patrol to do the right thing. One of the things that has long since frustrated me is, and I don't know if anybody was planning on asking a question about a quota, okay? In 34 years, I was never pressured, never told anything about how many tickets I had to issue, all right? The quota thing is ultimately a myth, at least in New South Wales. However, where I think it gets its legs is that, and I don't just blame the police, I blame a lot of other enforcement organisations. Think about the media reports over a long weekend, Easter or Christmas or whatever, okay? We don't necessarily hear about how many crashes there's been this year as opposed to last year. Sometimes we do, but generally the focus isn't on that. The focus is on how many breath tests have been done, how many speeding tickets have been given, how many seatbelt tickets, how many mobile phones, all that sort of stuff. So it creates an environment where numbers are the objective, okay? As far as the highway patrol is concerned, the performance evaluation is something that influences what they do. It's not a quota, but it influences what they do. So you will have guys that will go out there and, you know, issue a whole heap of minor stuff because it gives them a number. And at the end of the day, their bosses, who probably don't know much better than them about how to evaluate the performance of the highway patrol, think that the guy who sat off the stop sign with the overhanging branch that no one can see the stop sign and gives out 30 tickets a day is doing a much better job than the guy who stops 2 trucks and spends 2 hours with each truck driver going through everything and explaining and educating to the truck driver. I have my own opinion on that, and I think, you know, which I think is the more effective. But getting around that, like part of changing the culture of the way the highway patrol approach with any motorist, not just truck drivers, is getting around that performance evaluation that suggests numbers are the way to go. And that's going to take a long-term cultural change, and it will need to engage senior levels of the police. I think when we had the conversation a few months ago, I made mention of the fact that one of the challenges that we had, and I can say this now because I'm not a member of the police service and I'm not restricted by what I can say, the challenge was having people in charge who knew what the task under them was. And at the time I left, the people who were in charge of the highway patrol were detectives. Right? They'd never sat their bum in a highway car. wouldn't know the front of a truck from the back of it. When you've got a situation like that, I mean, there's a place for the detectives in policing organisations, but it's not in the highway patrol. When you've got a situation like that, where people up top don't know what the task is, they look for the easiest performance measure, and numbers are king. So when we can get policing organisations to get their head around that, I think we'll make some progress in regards to educating the police that numbers aren't king. You can actually take the time to speak to these drivers and educate them, and perhaps take the same approach that that salespeople are.
A long-term project then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Greg, thanks for that. A couple of funnies. Western Sydney University changed its name recently from University of Western Sydney and became Western Sydney University, and a lot of the international students dropped out because they thought they were going to get indoctrinated with Western culture and philosophy. This is for real.
There you go. I didn't know that.
The Chinese students actually thought they were going to be indoctrinated with Western politics. So anyhow, some things aren't all thought through. They're also a great university because they vetoed me doing my PhD by publication with them.
Okay.
So I went offshore. Anyhow, I've mentioned to various people, I said, look, the fatal crashes basically are not just the tip of the iceberg, they are literally the pinhead on the iceberg. 270. One of the insurers that I deal with, and many of you heard about as one of the sponsors today, basically, their database for 6 years had 172,000 truck claims.
Mm-hmm.
You don't hear that in the press.
No.
Yeah, you hear the fatals, you may hear a bit of the serious injuries, and some of the classifications of those are a bit wobbly as well. Right? There is this, people say, Rod said, don't we haven't learned enough about the industry. We know so little about the industry, especially the non-hire reward side. We have no idea how many fatals they have. We have no idea of the kilometres they travel. Basically, we only have a vague idea of the age of the trucks, basically there. But even the major crashes around, which I think is around about between 4,000 and 5,000 a year, there'd be police reports on about 30% of those.
Yep.
Pushing it. Really. Unless someone's hurt, unless someone's killed, often there's not a report. And I mentioned to Sal earlier that there was one jurisdiction recently in one of the big studies we're doing. Unless someone gets hurt or injured and it's a property and insurance problem, we don't care.
Yep.
And yet, here is one of the large insurers that has probably only got about 30% of its own market, plus none of the ancillary sector, which is 58% of the trucks, which people don't realise, and certainly politicians don't realise. They think every truck that moves basically is, on a freight rate, whereas that's not true, by a long shot, right? Was that there is an enormous number of stories out there that needs to be burrowed down.
Yep.
The mere fact you had one insurer in 6 years with an average of almost 30,000 claims a year, and we hear about 170 to 200 fatalities. There is an untold story there, and if anyone thinks there aren't lots of research and holes to be dug, and one of the reasons, as much as people respond to fatals, is that a lot of the academics research, that's the only data they got.
Yep.
And they were killed. The question is, keep digging, absolutely, go for it.
Just on that point that you're making, it's clear that there are big gaps in the skills of people who investigate crashes, not just truck crashes, but any crash. If it's a fatality or a serious injury, then that's when the crash investigation experts turn up, and even to an extent, not a lot of them have got much of a clue about heavy vehicle national law and chain of responsibility and all that sort of stuff. But if it's just a non-fatal crash or a non-injury crash, it's just the general duties police that turn up. And it might be a constable who's been in the job 5 minutes, or it could be a constable who's been in the job 5 years. So the quality of those investigations means that we're missing out on collecting a lot of data that could be really useful in telling the story of the true situation. So, yeah.
I've got time around that 2 questions.
Well, look, it's 4:30. We're supposed to be going for happy hour. And I don't know about the rest of you.
Mine's just more of a comment with, and Greg sort of went into it with that. We used to go to attend a lot of crashes as well, and quite a few of those were just misreported. They just ticked the box for fatigue. Rather than do a bit of investigation, I had several times where I spoke to the drivers after and they said, look, I just said I didn't know what happened because I didn't want to get in their drive. So they just said, yeah, right, and the road there was fatigue and all that sort of stuff. And then I did some bit of time in road safety, and then they use all those stats to make all their decisions. So they're 5-year-old stats, but that's all their decision making for the next 5 years.
Yep.
And that's where
Sounds just nodding away.
Yeah. Yeah. And that.
Work diary rules came in about because of the high fatigue.
Yeah. And that certainly is one of the issues, the time lag between when the data is collected and when it becomes available for use. Quite often it's obsolete by the time it's available to look at.
Just a quick one.
Yep.
You were looking after the Hannifey down this way back in the 90s, were you?
Yes, absolutely.
In your opinion, the crashes that happened with heavy vehicles, was it speed or fatigue? What do you think? What's your ploy? Back when it was single road?
Back when it was single road, I think it was a mixture of everything, really. Certainly speed was a factor. Back in the days when people were pumping up the trucks, I think the quickest truck I ever got on radar was 152.
I was going to say, what was the record?
Yeah, 152. Although I did look at a work diary one time that a guy had reworked, and in order for him to get from point A to point B, if that work diary entry was accurate, he would have had to do 2,250 kilometres an hour. So it was quite easy to convince the magistrate that yes, that is a false entry. But in reality, yeah, 152 was the quickest I've seen. But we used to find Sunday nights were the special night. And anything 145 to 150 was pretty common back in the day. I understand from colleagues that are still around here now that those speeds are less prevalent.
Yeah.
Back in the day, to answer your question, I think it was a mixture of fatigue, particularly on a Sunday night, because what we found was there was a pattern where Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the drivers had spent some time sleeping the night before. Sunday, quite frequently, they'd be watching the football or at the family barbecue or whatever, and wouldn't, for a range of reasons, some of which are quite legitimate and reasonable, wouldn't prepare themselves adequately for the journey that they've got to drive overnight. So, yeah, mixture of both.